confirmed that he is leaving the Rolling Stones for good after 30 years as a part of the band. Bill Wyman has finally spoken out 30 years after leaving the Rolling Stones. Fans had long thought that he was dating Keith Richards, and he confirmed it in a recent interview. They were important parts of a historical chain on stage. He wasn't involved in making decisions, though, and was looked down upon. In the end, Bill decided to leave without complaining. This is the only line he has said that shows what was going on behind the scenes. As part of a special reissue of his book Stone Alone, Bill Wyman was at the launch event in October 2024. He didn't try to avoid being asked about Keith Richards when it was brought up. His answer was short and clear. "We never really got along. I'm not angry, but I can't keep acting like I am. We come from different places. Brian and Keith didn't really hear me. They were having a drink at the bar, and Bill Wyman finally talked about the real reason he quit the Rolling Stones for the first time in over 30 years. It had nothing to do with age or wanting to work alone. Eventually he quit because he couldn't stand how Keith Richards treated him in a way that made him feel less important in the band. Yes, I did tell the guys almost 2 years ago that I didn't want to do it as much." Bill Wyman told Classic Rock, "We still give each other Christmas presents, but I've never really wanted to see Keith again." Someone who had shared the stage with Keith for 30 years said, "He's just not the kind of person I can spend long periods of time with." This wasn't a casual comment. It meant that Keith was being ignored in the studio, not given credit for important songs, and not allowed to make decisions in the band he had helped build from the start. In the first edition of Stone Alone, Bill Wyman had already told Keith Richards that he didn't agree with how the band's history was being told. He said that the early Rolling Stones were a democratic group led by Brian Jones, which was very different from Keith's story in his 2010 memoir Life, in which he and Mick Jagger were seen as the only creative leaders. "I didn't leave the band because I was tired of music," Bill Wyman once said. "I left because I just couldn't take it anymore." This feeling was supported by many details he gave in Stone and in later interviews. For example, he said he wasn't involved in important decisions and that his bass parts were changed in the studio without him being told. All of these things pointed to the idea that he was made to feel like he wasn't needed, even while he was still standing there. Still, Bill Wyman hadn't said these things so directly in more than 30 years. It wasn't until 2024, in a talk that wasn't publicized, that he finally did. Keith Richards hasn't responded, and neither have Mick Jagger nor Ronnie Wood. Perhaps they aren't surprised. The fight between Bill Wyman and Keith Richards started a long time ago, when Bill was the oldest member of the group and Keith still saw him as an outsider who had stumbled into the band. They had a difference that never turned into a fight. It was there, simmering, and slowly grew every year they stood next to each other. They were different from the start. Bill Wyman was born on October 24, 1936, in Lewisham, London, into a poor working-class family. His childhood was shaped by war, poverty, and living in Penge, southeast London, in a small space. The members of the Rolling Stones were all born in the late 1940s, but Bill became an adult in the early 1950s. When he joined the band, he was an adult among a group of 20-somethings who were ready to rebel. In December 1962, Bill officially joined the Rolling Stones, taking over for Dick Taylor. He brought his own amplifier, better cables, and most importantly, the band's lack of a solid bass player. Keith Richards once said that in the early days, Bill had more real performance experience than all of us put together. But that didn't last. At the time, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Brian Jones, and Charlie Watts were all in the band, and they were all close from their time in London groups together. Bill, who was older and from a different background, joined as an outsider. He was technically necessary, but he was never seen as a true friend. He was rarely the center of attention during rehearsals, songwriting sessions, tour planning, or even private conversations. In a journal entry from 1962, he wrote, "I feel more like a piece of equipment than a member." Still, in the beginning, everyone in the band treated each other professionally. Bill focused on the music and played the drums for albums like Out of Our Heads, 1965, and Between the Buttons. Reviewers said Bill was the most stable member of the group because he was always trying new things, shifting, and clashing. Still, when the band became very popular in the late 1960s, deeper differences started to show. Brian Jones, the member Bill was closest to, became more and more alone, and after Brian's sudden death in 1969, the split became even clearer at the funeral and other memorial events. Bill refused to take the private jet with the band, which made Keith angry because he thought it showed Bill didn't care about the group. From that point on, the distance between Bill and Keith grew. Keith took over the stage, the studio, and eventually the band's own space. Bill, who was still on album covers and touring a lot, felt like his role was shrinking. By the middle of the 1960s, Mick and Keith were credited with writing all of the songs under the name Jagger Richards. Bill and the others, on the other hand, were only credited with performing. Since they were not seen as shaping the band's musical direction, this set the stage for an imbalanced relationship that would last for decades, the rift born of power and money in his autobiography Stone Alone. Bill stated that he, Brian Jones, and Charlie came up with the riff idea for one of the band's most famous songs, Jumping Jack Flash. However, his name wasn't on the credits for I Can't Get No Satisfaction. Bill voted for the song to be released, even though both Mick and Keith were against it at first. It went on to become one of the biggest hits of the decade, but Bill's part was never recognized. He wasn't allowed to write songs, and he slowly started to notice the difference in pay. In an interview with Guitar.com in 2024, he confirmed that by the mid-1980s, when the Rolling Stones stopped touring because of a fight between Mick and Keith, he was $200,000 in debt. At the same time, Mick and Keith were still making steady money from writing and publishing royalties. Bill said, "I made about 1/10 of what they did. That space had nothing to do with being lazy." Bill was in the band for more than 20 years, and was at every show, every recording session, and all of the band's promotional events. But he didn't have much of an impact, even though he was the oldest member and had a lot of live experience. Bill wasn't allowed to be a part of strategic meetings, decisions about albums, staffing, or tour plans. A writer asked him how he felt about not being able to be creative in a 1991 interview that was never shown but came out in 2020. His answer was short: "I wasn't left out. I was never asked." When he wasn't in the studio, his biggest problem was still money. During the 1980s, when the Rolling Stones weren't playing because of problems within the group, Bill had to find other ways to make money. He wrote books, sold old photos, and worked on small projects. At the same time, Keith and Mick continued to get money from royalties from older songs. At that time, most of the money made from music and ads came from royalties. Bill never went to court or asked for back pay, but in interviews after 2000, he kept saying that the Rolling Stones were a band, not a business. He thought that the change from art to business was the main reason he became less close to the group he had joined near the beginning. Respect can't exist in a relationship where gain and power are the only things that matter. And Bill had been pushed to his limits during his last 10 years in the band. The band's last 10 years. Bill Wyman most clearly felt like he didn't fit in the Rolling Stones from the late 1980s to the early 1990s. Even though Bill got to many recording sessions on time and ready, he wasn't called into the main room until the end of the day, on several tracks. Before Bill even got to play his bass, Keith Richards or a guest artist had already played those parts. During the Steel Wheels Urban Jungle Tour in 1989 and 1990, this disconnect was at its worst. It was the band's biggest comeback after being quiet for years. People knew that the Rolling Stones were still strong when they saw Bill, Charlie Watts, Ronnie Wood, Mick Jagger, and Keith. Bill felt left out of every important meeting though, behind the scenes. He was only given the tour schedule and journey details, along with the instruction to show up on time. Bill was in every show, but he wasn't asked to help plan the production anymore, and he wasn't asked for his opinion on sound, lighting, or set lists. He said, "It felt like I was on my own stage, but as a fill-in star." The Rolling Stones were added to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1989. Keith did not say Bill's name during his winning speech. The news didn't say much, but fans on sites like IR started to wonder why a member who had been with the band since 1962 wasn't included. Bill told the band in 1991 that he was leaving. The talk was private, short, and straight to the point. What Mick Jagger and Keith did was not nice. Bill said in an interview in 1993 that their answer was small-minded and rude. Keith didn't say anything in public after 30 years of hard work, not even a simple thank you. But in the years that followed, he said a few things that caused a lot of trouble. Keith wrote in his 2010 book Life that Bill could have been replaced, and that he didn't make much of a change after he left. People saw these words as the last straw in a relationship that was already getting distant. Mick also heard some rude things said about him. At a party after a tour in 1993, Mick was asked about the new bass player. He said, "If we need someone on bass, I'll do it." Bill kept a calm attitude even after he stopped being an active member. In conversations from 1994 to 2000, he always said the same thing: "It was time for me to leave. I stayed too long." He left the band, and Daryl Jones, a talented musician who wasn't a full member, took over as bass player. Many Rolling Stones fans saw Bill's choice as the beginning of a permanent change in the band's structure. Bill wrote in Stone Alone that leaving the band was like leaving a family that no longer knew me. For most people, his leaving didn't come as a surprise, but for those who knew how the band worked, it was a clear sign that they were no longer a band. They turned into a system that was run by two men, with the others being parts that could be switched out. Bill Wyman turned around and left without backwards glance. He didn't stay away from music or choose complete silence though. Before Bill, no one in the Rolling Stones had ever changed what it meant to be an artist. He did this after he quit the band that wasn't his anymore, making the flame stay burning. Bill started Bill Wyman's Rhythm Kings in 1997. It was a band that played blues, rock and roll, and jazz, all of which he loved before he joined the Stones. The group didn't have any business or chart goals. Rhythm Kings mostly played small shows and festivals, and they put out their own albums. This wasn't a side project for Bill. He was really making music on his own terms for the first time. Early records like 1997's Strangers in the Night
In any case, both The Wind Blows 1999 and Groovin' 2000 got good reviews. People thought the Rhythm Kings' music was clean, honest, and true to the heart of live music, even though it didn't do very well in the music business. Some reviewers said it was more like a band than a brand. Bill also put out 3 records by himself at the same time: Stone Alone in 1976, Monkey Grip in 1974, and Bill Wyman in 1982. In 1981, his song CC John Rockstar was a big hit in the UK. It made it to the top 20 of the UK records chart and was played on radio stations all over Europe. Bill wasn't trained as a lead singer, but his half-spoken, half-joking voice became a signature sound that fans loved. Bill did many things besides music. He wrote books, took pictures, put together art shows, studied archaeology, and took care of the Rolling Stones' biggest private archive, which he had been doing himself since 1962. The press called his 2002 book, Rolling with the Stones, which has more than 2,000 pictures and documents, the most full visual autobiography of the band. Bill kept in touch with Charlie Watts until Charlie's death in 2021, even though Charlie was no longer in the Rolling Stones. He also said that he still got a gift or message from former bandmates every birthday and Christmas. When he talked to Classic Rock in 2024, Bill said, "We're like distant relatives. I don't see them very often, but I know they're still there." Bill briefly joined the band again at their live 50th anniversary show in London in 2012. After playing 2 songs, he left the stage. Keith Richards didn't say anything. "It was nice having Bill back, even if it was just for a little while," Mick Jagger said. The media saw the moment as an easing of tensions, but the distance stayed. Bill played bass on the track Live by the Sword on the album Hackneyed Diamonds in 2023. It was his first official recording with the Stones since 1989's Steel Wheels, and it was also the last recording to feature Charlie Watts. There wasn't a lot of hype or promotion, but for fans it was a clear ending. Bill never publicly attacked Keith, or tried to make peace with him for more than 30 years after leaving the band. In every interview he just said, "I gave enough." That was all the public needed to know. There wasn't a war, but there was also no foundation left to rebuild. Bill Wyman was an irreplaceable force for nearly 31 years, but they don't talk about him as a defining face of the Rolling Stones. Bill was a bassist who never tried to be the center of attention. He didn't write the lyrics or play lead, but the foundational lines he laid down gave songs like Paint It Black, Jumping Jack Flash, Under My Thumb, and Miss You their depth, pull, and consistency. People could feel the music even if they didn't know who was playing. Keith Richards once said, "The bass sits between the heart and the spine of a song." For 30 years, Bill Beyond Music played that role, and he was also the band's most careful archivist. From 1960 on, he kept daily journals where he kept thousands of photos, show tickets, set lists, letters, rough drafts of sheet music, and backstage notes. These records were used as the basis for his books Stone Alone, 1990, Rolling with the Stones, 2002, which music historians see as living historical records of one of the best bands of the 20th century. Bill influenced a lot of later generation bassists, like John Deacon Queen, Adam Clayton U2, and Alex James Blur, in how they played rhythm. Bill wasn't flashy or technically showy, but he was solid, precise, and right where it needed to be. That's the kind of musician every band needs, but the public often doesn't notice them. Bill's impact didn't come from a single moment of brilliance. It came from being consistent, which is what kept the band on track through thousands of shows. No matter how much the front of the stage changed, Bill Wyman doesn't need to officially rejoin the Rolling Stones to be recognized. He only needs music. The one thing he kept after leaving a band where he no longer had control over his place. The Rolling Stones are still one of the most important bands of the 20th century, but for Bill Wyman, being on stage with legends didn't mean he was respected as a real member of the group. He quit not to blame, but to protect what was left of himself. He doesn't feel bad about what he did, even after 30 years. What about you? Do you think artists need to speak out to protect their worth, or do you think silence is the best way to leave with honor? Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment.